It was just past 9 a.m. when the glass doors of the private executive tower slid open, and a frail-looking black woman stepped inside, her coat faded, her shoes worn from years of use. She barely made it 3 steps. "Hey, stop right there!" The voice was sharp. Cold. Final. The head of security, a tall white guard with a rigid stance and an even harsher stare, stepped directly into her path, blocking her completely. His eyes moved from her shoes, to her coat, to her face, and something in his expression hardened. "This building isn't open to the public," he said flatly. The woman looked at him calmly. "I'm not here as the public." A few people nearby slowed down, watching. The guard let out a short laugh. "Yeah, I'm sure you are." And without another word, he reached for her arm. What happened next would cost him everything. If you're ready for a story of silence, betrayal, hidden truth, and a moment that changes everything, then you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because Silent Voices brings you powerful stories where the unheard finally get their voice. Drop a fire in the comments if you believe justice always finds a way. Let's get into it. The building stood in the heart of downtown, 47 floors of glass, steel, and quiet power. It wasn't just an office tower. It was where decisions were made. Deals were signed. Lives were changed. And every person who walked through those doors looked the part. Tailored suits. Designer handbags. Polished shoes that clicked confidently across the marble floors. Except her. She stood out the moment she entered, not because she tried to, but because she didn't belong in their world. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. The guard's grip tightened slightly on her arm, not enough to hurt, but enough to control. "I said you can't be in here," he repeated louder this time. A few heads turned. A receptionist glanced up, then quickly looked back down at her screen. 2 men in suits slowed their pace, exchanging looks. Someone near the elevators whispered something under their breath, followed by a quiet chuckle. The woman didn't pull away. She didn't argue. She simply looked at him, steady, unshaken. "I have business here," she said softly. The guard tilted his head, a smirk forming at the corner of his mouth. "Business?" he echoed. "In this building?" His eyes scanned her again, slower this time, more deliberate. "What kind of business could you possibly have here?" The words hung in the air longer than they should have. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. There was no confusion in his tone. No curiosity. Just judgment. The kind that doesn't ask questions, because it already believes it knows the answer. Still, she didn't react. "I'd like you to call upstairs," she said calmly. "They're expecting me." That did it. The guard let out a dry laugh, shaking his head as if he had just heard the most ridiculous thing all morning. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping into something colder now, "the only thing waiting for you upstairs is a locked door." A few people nearby smiled faintly. Someone muttered, "Here we go." And just like that, the atmosphere shifted. What had started as a quiet misunderstanding was beginning to turn into something else entirely. Something heavier. Something public. And the worst part? He still had no idea who he was talking to. The moment stretched. Not long, but long enough for people to stop pretending they weren't watching. The guard's hand was still on her arm. Firm. Controlling. As if letting go would somehow mean losing authority. "Let's not make this difficult," he said, his voice carrying now, just loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "You need to leave." The woman's gaze didn't shift. "If you just make the call," she replied quietly, "this would be resolved." There it was again. Calm. Measured. Certain. And something about that certainty irritated him. Because it didn't match what he saw. Didn't match what he believed. His jaw tightened. "Listen," he said, leaning slightly closer, lowering his voice just enough to sharpen it. "People like you don't have meetings in places like this." A subtle pause. Then he added, "Not upstairs." A few nearby employees exchanged glances. One of them looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Another smirked. The woman blinked slowly. Not in confusion. Not in fear. But as if she had heard this before. Many times. "I'm asking you one last time," she said, her tone unchanged. "Call upstairs." The guard straightened. That was it. Whatever patience he had left, gone. "I'm not calling anyone," he snapped. "Because there's no one up there waiting for you." His grip tightened just slightly. "Now either you walk out yourself." He gestured toward the glass doors behind them. "Or I escort you out." The word escort hung there. Heavy. Threatening. And now the attention in the lobby had fully shifted. No one was pretending anymore. Phones subtly angled. Eyes locked. Waiting. Watching. Judging. Still, she didn't move. Instead, she did something unexpected. She glanced around. At the polished floors. At the people. At the building itself. As if taking it all in. As if recognizing it. Then she looked back at him. "You're making a mistake," she said. No anger. No accusation. Just a statement. Simple. Certain. And that, more than anything, set him off. Because it sounded like a warning. And he didn't take warnings from people like her. "I've had enough," he said sharply. And this time, he didn't wait. He turned, guiding her forcefully toward the exit. Her steps were slow, but steady. She didn't resist. Didn't argue. Didn't plead. The doors slid open again. Cold air rushed in. And just like that, she was outside. The doors closed behind her with a quiet, final hiss. Inside, the tension broke. A few people chuckled under their breath. Someone shook their head. "Unbelievable," a man muttered. "The nerve." The guard adjusted his posture, smoothing his uniform as if resetting the scene. Back to normal. Back to order. But for a brief second, just a second, something flickered across his mind. The way she had said it. "You're making a mistake." He exhaled, dismissing it. Turned away. And went back to work. Completely unaware that the real problem had just begun. For the next few minutes, everything seemed to return to routine. Footsteps echoed. Phones rang. Elevators opened and closed with mechanical precision. But not for everyone. Near the reception desk, a junior administrative assistant, Daniel, hadn't moved. He had seen the entire exchange. Every word. Every look. And something about it didn't sit right. At first, he couldn't explain why. It wasn't unusual for security to turn people away. It happened. But this felt different. Not because of what the woman said, but because of how she said it. There had been no hesitation in her voice. No uncertainty. Just quiet assurance. Like someone who knew exactly where they belong. Daniel glanced toward the doors. She was gone now. Just another forgotten moment in a busy morning. Or at least, that's how it should have been. Still, that feeling lingered. He turned slowly toward his computer. Hesitated. Then sat down. "Just checking," he murmured under his breath. Nothing more. Just checking. He pulled up the internal scheduling system. Scrolled through the day's appointments. Names. Times. Departments. Everything looked normal. Executives. Investors. Consultants. No one stood out. Daniel frowned slightly. Maybe he was overthinking it. Maybe. He paused. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, almost instinctively, he typed something else. Not a scheduled name. Not a confirmed visitor. Just a guess. The name she hadn't even fully said? A partial. The system loaded. For a second. Nothing. Then, a result appeared. Daniel leaned closer. His eyes narrowing as he read the line. Then again. Slower this time. His expression changed. Confusion, turning into disbelief. Because what he was looking at didn't make sense. Not with what he had just witnessed. Not with how she looked. Not with how she had been treated. He swallowed. Clicked into the profile. More data filled the screen. Corporate records. Historical entries. Ownership structure. And then, there it was. Clear. Undeniable. His breath caught. "No way," he whispered. Behind him, the lobby continued like nothing had happened. But Daniel wasn't seeing any of it anymore. Because on that screen was a name tied to something far bigger than anyone in that building had realized. And if what he was seeing was true, then the woman who had just been thrown out wasn't supposed to be stopped at the door. She wasn't even supposed to be questioned. She was. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly, heart beginning to race. Because suddenly, this wasn't a small mistake. This was something else entirely. Something that was about to change everything. The next morning didn't feel the same. Something invisible had settled into the building overnight. Conversations were quieter. Movements more cautious. Even the air itself felt heavier. Near the reception desk, Daniel stood stiffly, glancing at the entrance every few seconds. He hadn't slept much. The image on his screen from yesterday kept replaying in his mind. The name. The title. The ownership stake. It didn't add up, until it did. Then, at exactly 9:02 a.m., the glass doors slid open. And she walked in. But this time, she wasn't alone. Two sharply dressed legal professionals stepped in beside her, one carrying a structured black briefcase, the other holding a tablet already open. Their posture was different from everyone else in the building. Purposeful. Unapologetic. The lobby went silent. People recognized her immediately. Not because they knew who she was, but because they remembered how she had been treated. The guard turned. For a split second, confusion crossed his face. Then recognition. Then something else. Something uneasy. He stepped forward again, forcing a controlled expression. "Ma'am," he began, attempting a neutral tone. "You can't just. You've said enough." Her voice cut through the space. Not loud, but absolute. Everything stopped. She walked past him this time. Not rushed. Not hesitant. As if there had never been a question of permission. The two legal professionals followed closely. "Call your general manager," one of them said firmly to the front desk. No hesitation this time. No smirks. No whispers. Within moments, the general manager stepped out, adjusting his suit, his expression caught between irritation and forced professionalism. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked. The attorney didn't respond immediately. Instead, he placed the briefcase on the marble counter. Opened it. Removed a neatly organized stack of documents. And slid them forward. "You may want to read that," he said. The manager glanced down. Casually at first. Then again. Slower. His expression shifted. Confusion. Then tension. Then shock. The room felt like it shrank. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked, his voice no longer steady. The second attorney stepped forward. "It's not a joke," she said. "It's corporate record." A pause. Then the words that changed everything. "The woman you removed yesterday," she gestured slightly, "is the majority owner of this entire property." Silence. Heavy. Unforgiving. And slowly, every head in that lobby turned toward the guard. The guard didn't move. Couldn't. For the first time since anyone had seen him in that building. He had nothing to say. His posture, once rigid with authority, now felt misplaced. Like it no longer belonged to him. The woman turned to face him fully. And this time, there was no softness left in her expression. "Yesterday," she said calmly, "you decided who belonged and who didn't." Her words landed slowly. Each one deliberate. "You didn't ask. You didn't check. You didn't even consider the possibility that you might be wrong. The guard swallowed. His mouth opened slightly. But no words came out. Because there was nothing he could say that would undo what had already happened. The entire lobby watched. The same people who had whispered now stood silent, avoiding eye contact. The manager stepped forward quickly, his voice shifting into damage control. "Ma'am, we deeply apologize for the misunderstanding." She raised her hand slightly. And he stopped. "This wasn't a misunderstanding," she said. Her eyes moved briefly across the room, taking in the faces, the reactions, the silence. This was a decision. A pause. Then she looked back at the guard. "And decisions have consequences." The weight of that sentence settled heavily. The manager straightened, tension rising in his voice. "Effective immediately," he said, turning to the guard. "You are suspended pending." "No." The word came from her. Firm. Final. The room froze again. "Suspension doesn't teach accountability," she said. "It delays it." She took a step closer. Not aggressive, but undeniable. "From today forward," she continued, "you will no longer be in charge of deciding who belongs at the door. A beat. You'll be learning what it feels like to be on the other side of it." The meaning was clear. The shift complete. Behind him, Daniel watched, heart still racing. Because in that moment, it wasn't just authority being taken away. It was being redefined. And the message? Couldn't have been louder. Or more permanent. The days that followed didn't just bring change. They rewrote the atmosphere of the entire building. The same lobby that once echoed with quiet judgment now carried a different kind of silence. One filled with awareness. With restraint. With respect. People moved differently. Spoke differently. Even the smallest interactions felt intentional. At the front desk, greetings became warmer. Questions were asked before assumptions were made. And for the first time, it wasn't appearance that determined how someone was treated. It was humanity. The guard, once the gatekeeper of who belonged, now stood at the very edge of that same system he once controlled. Stripped of authority, reassigned to a row far from the entrance, he experienced the building from a perspective he had never considered before. Not as power, but as presence. And sometimes, as invisibility. Daniel, on the other hand, had been quietly promoted. Not for seniority. Not for status. But for something far rarer in that building. Awareness. Integrity. The ability to question what others accepted without thought. As for the woman, she didn't return for applause. She didn't linger for recognition. Her presence had never been about proving power. It had been about correcting it. Before leaving that day, she said just one thing to the staff gathered in the lobby. "Dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear labels. And it certainly doesn't ask for permission." A pause. "Learn to recognize it anyway." And with that, she walked out. Not as someone who needed validation, but as someone who had just redefined it. Megaphone CTA almost equals 90 words. If this story made you stop and think, even for a moment, then it's worth sharing. Because situations like this don't just happen in stories. They happen every day, in ways most people never question. So if you believe respect shouldn't depend on appearance, if you believe dignity should never be negotiated, then take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more stories that challenge the way we see the world. Because sometimes, the real lesson isn't what happened. It's what we choose to do after.